Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Nate Blum, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I am so excited about our time together. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And so with your permission, we're going to start where you were born and go all the way up to today. And then we want to talk about what you're working on today and then anything for tomorrow that you want to discuss. Okay.
That sounds great, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you. And greetings from not so sunny Lincoln, Nebraska today.
Oh, is that right? So
Yeah.
It's not so sunny today?
It actually had a little bit of flurries. So I just came
really?
back from some very warm countries and was not prepared for flurries today.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy. So my son, like I mentioned, went to UNL, and when we moved him there, he had like 10 pairs of flip-flops that he took with him, right? He didn't get to wear them much while he was there.
No, there's about 4 months a year. 4 months a year you get to wear the flip-flops.
Yeah, exactly, right. So kind of cool. He wore his boots out, just completely wore them off, right? So so it's great to have you, buddy. So where were you born?
So I'm from a little town in called McCool Junction, Nebraska,
Okay.
which is just south of York. York is significant to maybe some of your viewers who are versed in geography because while it may not be the actual geographic center of the country, it's where Highway 81 and Interstate 80 meet. Those are your north-south and east-west transcontinental highways.
Yeah, we
So I'm born just south of there. I grew up on a farm.
Oh, wow, that's cool. So question for you. What was your favorite thing about growing up on that farm just south of McCool Junction?
I'll tell you what, actually, my favorite thing growing up on the farm, and this is maybe when I was a little bit older, when I was in high school and I was working at the local Wendy's there in York, my first off-farm job.
Mhm.
But I would get home very late at night, and we were just 4 miles outside of town. And every night I'd get home and I'd get out of my car and I'd look up and you could see this beautiful view of the Milky Way.
Yeah.
And I've lived in the city ever since I was a young adult, and I really missed that, quite frankly. It was so nice.
That's amazing, man. When you're out in the country, like really in the country, like you're talking about, it's amazing how the sky just lights up.
Yeah,
It's unbelievable. I took a drive with my dad down south, I-25, just south of Albuquerque, down towards Las Cruces. And you felt like it was the middle of the night, and it felt like you could reach up and just touch the stars. They literally they looked like they were that close. It's just incredible.
I actually
Once
feel
you get out
badly.
that light pollution, and that kind of thing from the city.
I actually feel badly for my kids because the only time they've experienced that is when we've gone camping. Whereas I got a little spoiled with it growing up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, isn't that cool? I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, so yeah. And we raised sorghum, by the way.
yeah, great.
Yeah, for sorghum, right? Maize. So
Milo is what we call it here in the Midwest. But yeah, it's all sorghum. There's dozens of different names, hundreds of different names for sorghum around the world. But yeah, it's all sorghum.
grew up on molasses. Love that
Yep.
stuff. You heard me slip, right? So so you grew up in McCool, or just south on a farm just south of McCool Junction. So where'd you go to high school?
So actually, my education started in McCool. They do still have a school there. It's actually doing quite well, frankly. I lift it up all the time because they've really been able to adapt to the times and bring in students from around the county, whereas other schools have had to consolidate, as so many do in rural communities. But when I was growing up, town had about 346 people total, and my class was 7 people, including myself, all the way through 8th grade.
Wow.
And then I ended up going to high school for a year in Norfolk, Nebraska, up in the northeast part of the state, and then back down to McCool. But my last 2 years, junior and senior year, were in York. which is again 7 miles north of McCool Junction. So I'm
Gotcha.
a York Duke
There you
alum.
go. I love it. That's cool.
Yeah.
So in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
I've always liked to write.
Yeah.
I've really liked to write. Math has never been a big thing for me, but I love history, I love writing, and I love science.
Yeah.
And I was a terrible student. Even in college, I was a terrible student. And even as an adult, what I find is maybe it's a lack of discipline, I suppose. But if it's something I'm very interested in, I am all in on it. But if
Yeah.
it's something that's not of interest at all, I don't want anything to do with it.
I got you.
So, but for most subjects, that's worked out. Mathematics or another topic. So, whenever I'm talking to students, and I always ask them what their favorite subject is, those kids that raise their hand and say math, I go out of my way to go give them a high five because I say, listen, guy or gal, I need you because I'm terrible at this stuff.
Yeah.
So keep working on it.
Yeah, no kidding. We were talking about my son before we hit record. He's big into math, loves it, absolutely loves it. So,
Listen, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know the people that know the things you don't know,
oh,
right?
that's true.
It's not a cop out, but I don't need to be great at math because I know the people in my network that are, and
Yeah,
they're folks I can lean on, and there are things
yeah,
I'm good at that they're not. So it works
yeah.
out.
There you go. I love it. That's what Henry Ford used to say, right? He surrounded himself with people that were smarter than him.
Yeah.
I love that.
If you're the
So
smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
that's it right there, right?
Mhm.
So, so you graduate from high school. Actually, let me ask you this. So during your childhood, growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Actually, this is maybe a unique answer, but I'm going to say my eye doctor. So I was born with glaucoma,
Okay.
actually, and so my right eye actually is a fake eye,
Hmm.
which I finally had took the original out when I was 37, I want to say, so a few years ago. I'm 42 now. But because of that, I would go see the eye doctor every 6 months to make sure
Yeah.
the intraocular pressure was fine, try to preserve the eyesight in the good eye. And over the years, he really just became a fantastic mentor to me.
Hmm.
I was a big reader, so every time I'd go into his office, he'd ask me what I was reading. He'd always be very encouraging, tell me I was going to do great things. And I don't know, at some point, I guess I believed it.
Yeah.
And as a result of his mentorship, I became the first person in my immediate family to go to college.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh,
So you
yeah.
graduate from York and you go to college. Where do you go to college?
Well, I didn't go to college right away, actually.
Okay.
Remember, I said I was a terrible student.
That's all right. That's
No,
okay.
I always did well on tests and things like that. I did quite well on the ACT, but again, nobody in my family had gone on to college. So when you don't have that example,
Yeah.
sometimes you don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
And so actually my first job out of high school was with my eye doctor. I moved to Omaha for about a year.
Oh,
And that's when I really realized that if I was going to get ahead, I would need to do something more.
yeah.
So I ended up going to college. I had started a family when I was young, by the way. So my first daughter when I was 19 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so ended up getting a job at the hospital here in Lincoln at Bryan Health. Started out in the oncology unit, making beds and giving baths. Before, after 2 years of that, I transferred to the emergency room and I worked overnights. So what I would do is I would take classes during the day, started out at a community college, eventually transferred to the university, and then I would work overnight while I raised at that time, three small children,
Yeah.
my wife and I. It's not a path that I highly recommend.
Yeah.
It's a good way to sleep for about 4 hours a day for several years.
Yeah. No kidding.
But boy, our kids saw that sacrifice and they've done really well with their education. So I think it's all worked out for us.
That's awesome, man. So you were an example to them. That's cool.
Well, I mean, we're always an example, right? Good or bad. It's not a question of whether we are. It's which one are we?
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, they're sponges, man. They're just constantly watching and constantly wanting to be like you
Yeah.
know. So
Or the opposite. I mean, I've got a 15-year-old daughter now, my youngest. So at this point, it's the opposite of being like dad. But it's cool. Whatever.
well, she's finding her way, right? I mean,
Right.
that's an age where, what time is it? Right. Yeah, right. So, and that's part of it. I mean, it's, both of mine's both. So my daughter's 23, my son's 25. And, it was, being teenagers was an interesting time. I told them before they became teenagers, I said, you're going to challenge daddy's values when you become a teenager.
Mhm.
And I just
You know,
had,
we always told our kids, we've got 4 children. The oldest now is 24. He's a police officer in Kansas City area.
oh, awesome.
Our oldest daughter then is 23, just turned 23 the other day.
Yeah.
She teaches, and her and her husband are both in the Nebraska National Guard. Our youngest son is a U.S. Marine stationed in Japan.
Wow.
He fixes jets for a living. And then our youngest daughter is 15, and she's a couple more years here at home. But what we've always told our kids is we love you, absolutely, no matter what, but we're not here to be your friend. We
Yeah.
can be your friend when you're a grown up and when you're older. And more importantly, we're not in the business of raising adult children. So if you get yourself in a mess, you better figure out a way to get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I said the exact same thing. I told
Yeah.
him, I said, you don't like daddy right now. I'm not here to be your friend.
Mhm.
I'm here to prepare you to go out of that big, beautiful world and to leave it better than the way you found it.
Amen to that.
Okay. And that was it. And no, they didn't like me when they were growing up. And I told them, I said, you're going to challenge daddy's values when you become a teenager. And the only thing I can tell you is you had better bring it.
Yeah.
And you better be prepared to lose.
Well, listen, I've always operated with the philosophy that my job is to do better than my parents did, and
Yeah.
God bless them. I mean, they worked hard. Fourth generation farm is where I was.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have. I've because of education and other opportunities, I have done better than them. But conversely, my children, I want them to do better than I did, and I want
Absolutely.
their kids to do better than them. And one thing I also always told my children is your job is to be better than me.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. And frankly, I think the older three have. They've all chosen these service careers. It's going to teach them how to really make a positive impact in the world. And
Yeah.
we're all very, very proud of them.
Yeah. That's cool, man. That's awesome. So you raised them right. That's good news.
Well,
So
they take after their mother, Mike. You
there
see,
you go. Right.
they're good looking and intelligent, so they take after their mother.
I love it. So where did you go to college?
So I'm a University of Nebraska Lincoln alum. I
Okay.
got a
Beautiful.
degree. I got my degree in psychology, actually, a full 10
Yeah.
years after I finished high school. So again, don't don't recommend starting a family but then going to school, but it can be done.
It happens.
So I got
If
my
you want
degree
it
in
bad
psych.
enough, you'll make it happen, right?
Yeah, I mean it's just a question of how hard do you want to make it on yourself, and I don't have any regrets, none at all.
Yeah.
But again, when I'm talking to young people, I'm like, focus on those studies first. It's a lot easier.
No
So,
kidding. Right.
yeah, I got my degree in 2009 in psychology, and actually went on and took a job in financial services for a couple of years. You remember '09 was when the job market, everything fell apart.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to work in the ER anymore because here I had earned something and I wanted to go do something else.
Yeah.
And what I learned working in insurance and investments was I'm really not good at insurance and investments.
Oh yeah.
Not that I'm bad at them, actually. I'm not a good salesman necessarily if it's
Yeah.
something I'm not really passionate about.
Yeah. You got to be
But
into it. That's for
yeah,
sure.
for sure. But through that, actually, I ended up doing some advocacy work for the Alzheimer's Association
Ooh.
as a volunteer and as a way to, kind of try to grow my business portfolio, my client list.
Mhm.
Um, and they sent me to Washington, D.C. for their annual conference.
Yeah.
And if your listeners have never been to one of these, what happens is you go and you've got this 3-day conference where they tell you all the things about the organization and things that they'd like you to then repeat on Capitol Hill. Because on the 4th day, everybody from all over the country is going to go up to the Capitol Hill and you're going to have meetings with your members of the federal delegation. And they would like you just to say the same things that they've taught you. Okay.
Right.
So
Puppet.
the day that I was supposed to go to the Hill happened to be the day of the Nebraska breakfast. And if your viewers aren't familiar, the Nebraska breakfast is actually the country's longest continually running state delegation breakfast in Washington, D.C. And so every Wednesday when they're in session, the 2 U.S. senators and the 3 U.S. congressmen from the state of Nebraska will come together. There's usually about 50 guests in the room, and it's an opportunity to get in front of all of them at the same time and listen to what it is that they're working on.
Right.
Well, I had never been to Washington before, and so I thought, by golly, I'm going to go do this because it was kind of just a tourist thing, I suppose, really.
Mhm.
But I've always been fascinated by government, and so I went there, and I realized about halfway through that they were announcing people in the crowd, and those people had to stand up and take a couple minutes to tell everyone why they were there.
Hmm.
And I'm not a morning person, so I'm a little slow anyway, I suppose. And pretty soon I realized I was going to have to speak. It was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
So sure enough, I think Senator Ben Nelson at the time introduced me.
Mhm.
And so I stood up and introduced myself, said why I was there and everything, and then sat back down. And at the time, I was not a very good public speaker. I was actually
Yeah.
pretty terrified of that sort of thing at the time. Um, Anyway, afterwards, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry from the first congressional district of Nebraska, he's no longer in office now, but he pulled me aside and he says, "Wow, you did a really great job at the breakfast." And I ran into him a few times during the day, and he said the same thing. And then a few days later, I had stayed around to do a little sightseeing.
Mhm.
But I get on the plane to come home, and there's Congressman Jeff Fortenberry sitting in the
Oh,
front seat.
wow. Oh, cool.
And he stops me and he says, "Hey, you did a great job at the breakfast." Okay, cool. So a few weeks later, I'm sitting in my office just thinking how miserable I am at selling insurance. And so I wrote a letter of all things, and it seems so naive now. But I wrote a letter with my resume and sent it to his office. And I said, "Hey, listen, I'm not asking you for a job, but I know you know a lot of people in the district. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm not good at. So if your team knows of anything, just give me a holler." Now, that's not a letter you tend to send to congressmen, but I was a lot younger and more naive.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, a few 2 weeks after that, I get a phone call, and I remember it distinctly. It was I want to say it was December. There was snow on the ground, and I was taking our youngest daughter sledding. I had a little
Mhm.
pickup truck at the time, and my phone rang and said unknown caller, and I figured what the heck, so I answered it. And it's Congressman Jeff Fortenberry on the other end of the line. And he says, "Hey, I got your letter and your resume. And boy, I remember you from the breakfast. You did a great job." And he says, "I happen to have a position open in the office, and I wonder if you might come and talk about it." So I ended up
Cool.
working for him. I took a job doing outreach. I worked for that office for about 5 years. Had no
Mhm.
experience in politics, policy, other than being on a farm growing up, and but did well with people doing outreach, and eventually helped to inform agricultural policy in the office as well. Did that for about 5 years. And then eventually, during that time, my father passed. And all of a sudden, I had to figure out how to manage a farm that I hadn't bid on in 20 years.
Mhm.
And so I found a agricultural leadership development program through the University of Nebraska called the Nebraska Lead Program. And I was fortunate enough to get in on my first attempt. It's a 2-year program. It's very intensive. Once a month, they meet for about 3 days. And in the first year, it culminates in a trip to Washington, D.C., and some stops in Chicago, and then Moline, Illinois at John Deere on the way home. And then at the end of your second year, it culminates in an international study seminar. And my class went to Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. So it's a
Wow.
great way to open your eyes and learn and things. And the most important thing I learned during that program, though, was that my ideas had merit.
Hmm.
And as I was dealing with the farm and everything, I got in there to learn how to run the farm. But
Mhm.
you spend a lot of time when you lose a parent thinking about legacy, what their legacy was, and so at the same time I was learning that my ideas had merit. I was also thinking about, well, what's my legacy,
Yeah.
and more importantly, why am I working for someone else's legacy?
Yeah.
And so about that time, then the long time, 38-year tenure director of the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board was retiring. A friend of mine encouraged me to apply for it, knew that I was ready for the next thing. And so for the next 4 years, I served as the executive director of the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board, which is a part of the Nebraska Department of Agriculture.
Right.
But those commodity boards are also funded not by the legislature, but by their farmers directly to do things like education, research, and markets development.
Yeah.
So I did that for 4 years, and along the way, we increased the acres for sorghum growth in Nebraska by 130%. Which I'm always cautious to say that we shouldn't measure our success in how many acres we have, but how our farmers are doing.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, I mean, listen, if you're increasing anything by 130%, that's nothing to stick a feather at, right? So,
Yeah.
um, but during that time, we also built kind of a globally recognized brand on social media platforms. We had a small budget, so what do you do to advertise? Well, you do
Mhm.
anything free.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Social media is a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so we built this kind of this international group, no pun intended, or organically. Um, and it was really just a group of stakeholders from around the world that said, "Hey, we're going to have challenges and competition as far as commodities go, but maybe in the sorghum space in particular, we can find some ways to work together because
Okay.
the pie is so small compared to the others." Sorghum is the fifth most commonly grown cereal grain, but it's a far cry from some of these other grains
Yeah.
as far as volume goes.
Right.
So, as we did that, one thing that came onto our radar was that the United Nations was gearing up for 2023's International Year of Millets.
Hmm.
And so I made sure to make it a point to be at the opening ceremony, which was December of 2022.
Hmm.
And our organization at that time, we called Sorghum United, just as a loose group.
Hmm.
Excuse me. We made it a point to study things like the International Year of Quinoa. What did quinoa do that was so successful, and what were some things that we could not only do, but maybe also avoid that they did that weren't so good.
Right.
And so we were all prepared, and we go there, and I look around the room, and I'm the only person from North America there. And my comrades, my people, my friends from Europe, there's only a few of them. Most of the folks were from Africa and India.
Hmm.
And we came away from that realizing that if anybody was going to drive the International Year of Millets outside of Africa and India, it was going to have to be us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The industry just didn't seem to be interested in upsetting the status quo, and I felt like that is a missed opportunity for our farmers.
Yeah.
And growing up on a farm, I'm kind of passionate about providing opportunities for our farmers and for
Sure.
regional food systems. So I came home and fortunately was able to financially be able to do this, but I left my position at the Nebraska Sorghum Board and we started the Sorghum United as a full-blown NGO. Gosh, what are we, 14 months in now or something like that? So that's kind of how we got where we've gotten, and we've seen incredible gains here in the last year, and we're just gearing up here for some even more rapid growth soon, and I think we're going to be even more unrecognizable next year.
That's
Success breeds success.
Sure. Good for you. So let me back up for just a second. So you end up working with the sorghum board, right?
Hmm.
And you increase the amount of sorghum being planted or number of acres being planted by 130%. So let's talk about that for just a second. Why was it important for farmers in Nebraska to plant more sorghum?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say to anybody, and I do a lot of media, and so I always make sure to bring this out. I like corn. I like wheat. I like rice. All these things. I like soy. Um, and so there's room on the plate for everybody. The
Oh, sure.
problem that we have though is that our systems are out of balance, right? It's
Okay.
so heavy. So for example, where I grew up on the farm, we used to do beans, wheat, and milo. Milo being the North American name for sorghum.
Right.
Now that for the last 35 years or so, that area has all been corn on soybeans.
Yeah.
And so there's just not a lot of markets for these other grains, and these grains that can provide a lot of benefits to soil health, water conservation, biodiversity. But if farmers don't have markets, they can't grow them. You can't
Right.
expect farmers to grow something they can't sell.
True.
So why is it so important for Nebraska farmers to be able to do that? Well, again, it provides that rotational benefit within a cropping system, as well as diversification in markets opportunities. The commodity markets are dominated primarily by China. In
Mhm.
fact, if depending on when this airs, your listeners would notice that recently China has been making the news because they've been purchasing large quantities of all sorts of grains around the world. Sorghum's no different. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, there was a report that had come out that globally corn and sorghum prices had dropped by 20% in one day.
Hmm.
And then lo and behold, 2 days later, China's making their largest purchase of US sorghum that they had in 3 years.
Hmm.
So we need to find more diversified markets. I don't have a problem with China buying. It's fine. But anytime you've got a customer that's purchasing, 80% of your product, which is globally how much sorghum they produce or they buy, 93% of U.S. sorghum, 80% of global sorghum,
Wow.
then you've got a problem, right? So what we really talk about for our farmers is not just crop diversification, but also markets diversification by finding local and regional value-added production so that we can capture some value locally while also creating new opportunities for jobs in rural communities, as well as promoting local food systems.
Gotcha.
So that's really what we focus on.
So in Oklahoma, on the farm that I grew up on, they would plant wheat, raise wheat. They would then disc it down and they would plant maize, sorghum, right? Sorghum maize.
Well, maize is corn.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I've got it confused. I apologize. I thought it
No,
was
that's all right. It's
maize
fine.
that they were growing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Outside of the U.S., we say maize instead of corn because that's
I got you.
what they say.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it looks so the product, the actual fruit, the actual product of the plant looks like sorghum to me.
Well,
They called it maize when I mean
really?
I didn't plant it. The farmer that rented the place for my grandfather did. When
Yeah.
I farmed it myself, we only grew wheat.
Okay.
And then we went dormant basically for a few months and then planted again to wheat. So what they would do is they would come in, disc it down because it was lighter till, right? They didn't flip it like we used, like we flipped it every year. And flipping, for those people that don't know, is plowing basically, where you're taking wheat, you're taking ground that was planted to wheat and you're flipping it upside down. You're burying the wheat stubble. And what we would do is we would actually just work the ground basically for the next 3 months, prepare it, and then we put it back out to wheat. What they did was they'd come in and disc it down, and then they would plant right away. They'd sow right away, and it looked like sorghum to me that they planted.
I'm sure it was. They do a lot of sorghum in Oklahoma because it's very dry, and sorghum uses about a third of the water of corn. But I don't know. Maybe he called it maize intentionally. That's a new one for me. But if it looked like sorghum.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.